impact, not just on national politics, but internationally is well known. And he's had really a very complicated or different kind of political journey in that we just remember what he's been doing and his impact. But back when he first came in the Senate, it was the country and the Senate weren't as polarized as they were, and he was much more likely to work across the aisle and been involved in a couple of bipartisan initiatives that ultimately didn't work out. And now in the last 5 or 6 years, we just remember as this kind of staunch conservative, which shows that he was extremely politically savvy, that he didn't like to lose. And he was smart enough to know, this is going to lose, let's not spend any capital on this, let's go for something that we can actually accomplish, which I think is a strong part of his legacy.
Yeah. Right now you can see right there on your screen as they have brought in the body, as they are bringing it right now into the middle of the rotunda. Can either of you speak a little bit about what we are expecting inside this rotunda today as far as this ceremony? How does this work for our viewers who may not be familiar with what's happening?
Yeah, so I will say, first of all, that having a ceremony in the rotunda is a relatively rare kind of thing. This is reserved for individuals that have had a very prominent impact on the country. So I think that also speaks to the legacy of Lindsey Graham. But we will see, the casket brought into the place of honor. We will hear some individuals speak about him, and we will basically have an opportunity to remember who he was and kind of the influence that he had in U.S. politics.
Yeah, you can see it right now as they are showing who the men and women who are right now there. It looks like that he has now just entered into the middle of the rotunda there too. Bob, you also mentioned, as we're continuing to talk about this, his international legacy as well. Are we expecting anything from that to kind of be brought up in any of these speeches today? We would assume so.
I think they will. I think that, as Kirk mentioned, this is just the highest honor, and you're going to hear all the tributes. And you can just see from some of the people that I think last we saw the vice president was there. And so it's just again, another manifestation of how well respected he was, and given this kind of unique ceremony, speaks again to his legacy.
Yeah, speaks to so much that he has done, not only for the world, but also right here in the United States. That's why we're having that rare moment in there as well. So what we are going to do, we are going to bring you right now into the rotunda as the ceremony is about to begin, but we will be back recapping what is going on there and throughout the entire day, both today and tomorrow. Let's go ahead and send you straight on over to DC.
Would you pray with me? God of the ages, it is your almighty hand that guides our lives and directs our steps. Often it takes the suddenness of death to see how your divine love shapes and leads each one of us on life's journey. And in these moments of mourning, we necessarily take the time to give thanks for those whose lives have left a lasting and significant impact on us and on so many along the way. We invite your divine presence with us in this ceremony, that you would bless our efforts to honor appropriately the influence and effect Senator Lindsey Graham has had on each one gathered here and on this country and on the world. Give us eyes to see how you led a boy from central South Carolina through a life marked by personal hardship and legendary public service placing upon him the mantle of leadership that Lindsey Graham bore faithfully and courageously for decades in service to this nation as airman, congressman, and senator. It was you, O Lord, who brought him through adversity, shaping within him an enduring sense of responsibility. It was you who, throughout his noteworthy career, equipped him with his assertive spirit, a force to be reckoned with, while also instilling in him a pragmatic determination to get things done, even when it required negotiating with the other side. It was you who emboldened him with both courage and grace, so that while many would know no tougher adversary, most would realize no better friend. And now, as this patriot rests from his labors and stands before you, may Lindsey Graham hear your own well done, good and faithful servant. It is in your eternal name we pray. Amen. Please be seated.
Senator Darlene Graham, members of the Graham family, Vice President Vance, Majority Leader Thune, and other distinguished guests, I'm incredibly honored to offer on behalf of the people of South Carolina our immeasurable gratitude for the statesman and even better friend, Senator Lindsey Graham. When people talk about Lindsey Graham, they often talk about the titles he has held: the congressman, the senator, the chairman, the colonel. But titles only tell a small part of the story. To truly understand Lindsey, you have to understand his deep love for South Carolina and his family, and his belief that public service is a responsibility, not simply a position. To say he loved South Carolina is an understatement. He loved every city in our small but very powerful state. And he always carried South Carolina traditions with him. He understood the people of our state, our independence, our values, our willingness to work hard, and our desire for leaders who will stand up for what they believe is right. Whether walking the streets of his hometown, meeting with locals, or representing South Carolina on the world stage, he never forgot where he came from. Like most South Carolinians, family meant everything to Lindsey. It drove his passion for service. It drove his fight for policy, and it kept him grounded. Here in Washington, a town where many lose sight of who sent them here and why they're here at all, Lindsey never forgot where he came from or who he was here to serve. What made Lindsey exceptional was his ability to work on difficult issues while maintaining personal relationships with people who disagreed with him. He believed that conversations mattered. He believed that showing up mattered. And he believed that leadership meant finding a way forward even when the path was complicated. And he was also very good at outsmarting the trolls, the armchair critics, and the keyboard warriors. Everyone can recount stories of Lindsey's quick wit, his unforgettable sense of humor, and his ability to make people laugh when you least expected it. He was authentic. He never tried to be someone he wasn't. A legacy is not built only through votes, legislation, or headlines. A legacy is built through the lives touched, the relationships formed, and the focused mission to make a difference over time. Lindsey Graham's legacy is one of service to South Carolina, to our nation, and to the cause of making the world a safer and better place. He spent his life standing for something larger than himself, and that commitment will continue to be remembered by those who had the privilege of knowing him and by generations who will benefit from his service. Perhaps what I'll remember most was his love for our military. Lindsey proudly served for 33 years in the United States Air Force, retiring as a colonel. He deeply understood the sacrifices made by the men and women who wear our nation's uniform because he wore it himself. I am the Congresswoman for the Upstate and a Lieutenant Colonel for the South Carolina Air National Guard. But Lindsey never missed an opportunity to remind me that he outranked me, not only in service, but also in his office in the upper chamber. And you know what? He had earned that right. He loved our service members, he loved our veterans, and he never stopped fighting for him. Just last week, I received a call from a friend that I had served with. He was a colonel, a pilot. He told me years ago he was on an aircraft and Senator Graham happened to be on that plane. He said he thought he never would get him out of the cockpit because he was right in the middle, almost the entire flight, talking to the pilots and learning more about them. That's just who Lindsey was. He wanted to be right there alongside our fighters and our veterans. I was proud to call Lindsey Graham my constituent and honored to have called him my friend. Service is not celebrity nor comfort, and public service is never accomplished by one person alone. Every member knows it takes a team. And he built one of the best teams who faithfully served alongside him. To every member of his Senate staff, both past and present, thank you for your service to Lindsey, to South Carolina, and the United States of America. Your professionalism, your loyalty, and your sacrifice and your loss is recognized. Having served under the Department of the Air Force, Lindsey and I both knew the Airman's Creed, which partly reads, "My mission is to fly, fight, and win." I am faithful to a proud heritage, a tradition of honor, and a legacy of valor. Those words describe Lindsey Graham's life. Through triumph and hardship, victory and criticism, a legacy of service. I remember so well one of my last joint events with Senator Graham. We shared a stage together at a church in our district to discuss our shared support for the people of Israel and to talk about our faith. Those were two topics that were very important to both of us. Senator Graham's death was unexpected. He had a full schedule. He had plans. And in this time of mourning, we're reminded of God's comfort and that his plan is perfect. None of us know when it's our time, but we're reminded that our only eternal hope is found in our Savior. As the Bible reads in the book of Romans, chapter 10, verse 13, "For whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved." To the Graham family, may God bless you and keep you. And may God continue to show each of us the grace that we do not deserve.
Mr. Vice President, Darlene, Senator Graham, Larry, members of the Graham family, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's difficult to believe that we're here today to say a final farewell to Lindsey as he leaves the Capitol for the last time. My heart is heavy. I feel his absence every day, and I know so many of my colleagues do as well. Senators on both sides of the aisle counted him as a friend. And Republicans and Democrats alike, including the Democrat leader, are here to say farewell. Lindsey was a towering figure here in the Senate and on the international stage. His leadership on national security and on our national defense is well known. I traveled with Lindsey all over the world as part of congressional delegations, and I saw firsthand just how much he was respected by our allies and just how well he was able to connect with foreign leaders around the globe. Striking, too, was the instant connection he had with the military men and women that we met. They recognized him immediately as one of their own. Lindsey's work on these issues would be enough to cement his place as a leader in the Senate. But he was a leader on many other issues, too. As chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee in the 116th Congress, he fought tirelessly to advance well-qualified judges. He was serving as chair of the Budget Committee at the time of his death and was responsible for getting important tax relief legislation to the floor. And no tribute to Lindsey's work is complete without mentioning that he was a powerful voice for the pro-life movement. Until my last breath, I will be fighting for this cause, he said. And he was. He was a fierce defender of Ukraine. He was a fierce defender of the unborn. And on the surface, these might seem like two completely separate issues. But it strikes me that in another way, they are both of a piece. In both cases, Lindsey Graham saw injustice, and he spoke up. And, was as typical of Lindsey, he spoke up fearlessly. I don't apologize for being pro-life, he said in an interview in 2022, and probably on a number of other occasions. It didn't matter to Lindsey whether an issue was popular or unpopular, whether he had the full support of his colleagues or whether he was standing alone. If he believed he was in the right, he spoke up. He told things the way he saw them, and he didn't mince words. But lest anyone think it was all work and no levity with Lindsey, let me just say that there was no one who took his job more seriously than Lindsey Graham. But also no one was more capable of cracking up a room. During the work week here in Washington, a lot of us are away from our families, so we often get together in groups for dinner. And let me tell you, Lindsey was always the first call. The conversation and the laughs always flowed at any meal where Lindsey Graham was present. He was entertaining always, and pretentious never. There are a lot of so-called self-made people in the world, he once said. I'm not one of them. My family, friends, neighbors, and my faith picked me up when I was down, believed in me when I had doubts. You made me the man I am today, he said. Ladies and gentlemen, Lindsey will be remembered as a senator and as a statesman. But for me, most of all, I will remember him as my friend. It's hard to think that there will be no more Senate dinners with Lindsey, that he won't be dropping by my office to discuss some piece of legislation or make me laugh with his witty commentary. But I cling to the same faith that Lindsey had, to the sure and certain hope of the resurrection and the knowledge that death is not the end. I am the resurrection and the life, says the Lord. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. To Darlene and the Graham family, to Lindsey's beloved staff members, be assured of the prayers of my wife Kimberly and I, and the prayers of so many in this room. And to Lindsey, rest in peace, my friend. I look forward to the days when you make us all laugh again.
Well, first to Darlene and to the Graham family, all of you, I know you loved Lindsey and were proud of him, and he was proud of you, and I'm very, very sorry. It's good to see you all here among his friends and his colleagues, and I also, of course, have to issue my condolences to them. I know so many of you loved Lindsey like I did. So many of you argued with Lindsey, laughed with Lindsey, relied on Lindsey, and I also, of course, want to give condolences to a group of people you sometimes don't hear as often mentioned in the same breath, but I know who loved him, which is his staff. I know all of you worked for him for a long time. Many of you worked for him for longer than, I've been in public service, certainly longer. Some of you even than I've been graduated from high school. Don't mean to age any of you, but what a testament to a man that he has so much loyal and devoted staff. And I think that's the first thing I want to tell about Lindsey Graham. I want to tell some stories, but I also want to make an observation, which is that Lindsey Graham loved people from all walks of life. I think in part because of the way that he grew up, because of the fact that he wasn't handed everything. He was fascinated in everybody. He was fascinated in the wait staff in the Senate dining room. He was fascinated in the people who made the food. He was fascinated in the lowest staffer who had been hired 3 days earlier. He was fascinated by, of course, the very leadership of our country. And I think he was fascinated in people because he loved people and he was interested in them. He was the kind of guy who would walk into the Senate. And when he walked into the Senate, this was a guy who couldn't have stood more than 5'6" or 5'7", but he'd swashbuckle in with his jacket open like he was 6'5". He had an attitude to him, and it's one of the reasons why Lindsey Graham was Lindsey Graham. But he would walk into the United States Senate, and he would slap you on the back. He would greet the person who served his food. He treated everybody the same because he was fascinated and he loved every single person in this chamber. And that's a great testament to the man. I first got to know Lindsey Graham when I was on the Senate campaign trail for my own Senate race in 2022. And I remember riding in the back of the car with him. During these campaigns, you go from one event to the next and to the next event. And I remember learning a lot from him. I had a lot of people who campaigned with me during that time, but I learned something from Lindsey Graham, the way that he interacted with people, the way that he was so interested in what was going on and what was moving people and what was motivating them and what they were interested in. That affection and love of people was obvious even on the campaign trail, but so too was Lindsey Graham's world-class sense of humor. And in one event in particular, we had just left one event, we were riding in the back of the car going to the next event. Lindsey Graham told me a story about his time in the House. And if I repeated exactly what he told me, Darlene, it would be the end of my political career forever. But what I can say is that I was laughing so hard that by the time we got to the next event, I had abdominal cramps and I was barely able to speak because Lindsey Graham could make anybody laugh. And he could make anybody feel at home. I was talking to, a mutual friend of ours, a person who didn't always agree with Lindsey Graham's politics just shortly after his death. And I expected the person maybe to say something critical, but he said, you know what? Even though we sometimes disagreed, I loved Lindsey Graham. It was impossible not to like him. That swashbuckling, infectious laugh, that attitude, that passion that so many others have talked about. Lindsey Graham was impossible not to like. as a human being, and of course, as a United States Senator. You know, I remember on that campaign trail where, you're trying to raise money. And one of the ways that you raise money is you send people to your campaign website. And I said, Lindsey, before one of these Fox hits on the campaign trail, I said, Lindsey, could you maybe mention the website, jdvance.com? And over a 4-minute interview, he must have mentioned jdvance.com close to a dozen times. The host would ask, how was the weather? And Lindsey would say, well, before I check the weather, I always go to jdvance.com. And in a 4 or 5 minute TV appearance, Lindsey Graham raised us over $100,000. And that campaign stop was a critical part of me getting elected to the United States Senate and, of course, going on this incredible journey. That was who Lindsey Graham was. I remember once I got to the Senate, getting in this argument with Lindsey, and as John said, as Leader Thune said, he was a fierce defender of Ukraine, and he and I got into this intense argument at a Senate lunch. I think some of our colleagues probably remember this, about a funding bill for Ukraine. And I remember at the end of it going back to my staff, and I was at the time working on a rail legislation that I really, really cared about. And I remember going back to my staff and saying, well, that's probably the end of Lindsey's vote on the railway bill, because he is never going to support anything I support after the argument that he and I just had. And of course, I found out a couple of weeks later from another Senate colleague that the fiercest advocate of that bill behind the scenes was Senator Lindsey Graham. Now, Lindsey was who he was, and I knew that Lindsey couldn't even pretend to care about rail policy. It was something I really cared about, but it wasn't something Lindsey was particularly focused on. And so I went to Lindsey and I said, why are you helping me? Why are you helping this legislation? And I expected him to do what so many politicians would do. I expected him to lie and say, well, I really care about rail legislation. And he said, oh, I don't care about that at all. I said, well, why are you helping me? And he said, well, I don't care about it, but you do. And that was the kind of colleague he could be, a person you argued with and fought with in 1 minute, but behind the scenes, without collecting an ounce of credit, was working for you and working for the things that you cared about in the next. That was who Lindsey Graham was. Before I knew Lindsey, one of the most enduring parts of his legacy is I do believe that Justice Kavanaugh would not be on the Supreme Court were it not for his fierce advocacy during a critical moment. Remember that Senate confirmation hearing where Lindsey, and by the way, he got criticism from the Republican side of the aisle for this. He would always vote for qualified Democrat judicial nominations. He came to the judicial nomination process in a spirit of bipartisanship. Again, he was criticized sometimes from our side of the aisle for that, but what he saw happening to Kavanaugh was not a policy disagreement, it was character assassination. And Lindsey got as fiery and as passionate as I have ever seen a human being get during a judicial confirmation, and I believe that he saved that nomination. Now, that moment, of course, went viral, but Lindsey didn't do it for social media clicks. He did it to do something at the very highest part of the Senate, which was to persuade his colleagues. And persuade his colleagues he did. I remember there were a few people who were waffling at that moment, a few people who were unsure what they were going to do. Lindsey didn't just earn a lot of headlines, he actually persuaded people. And that maybe is how I will choose most to remember my friend Lindsey Graham. He saw that the Senate, at its very worst, could be a venue for character assassination. But because he loved people, he saw that the Senate at its very best could be a deliberative body geared towards persuading people. And that's what Lindsey Graham did in that case and in so many others. So I choose to remember Lindsey Graham as a man who could disagree with you without being disagreeable. I choose to remember Lindsey Graham as a person who could fight with you on one issue but fight for you on another issue. I remember Lindsey Graham as a man who loved people. And because he loved people, he was willing to reason with them, to respect them, and ultimately to persuade them. May God comfort all of those who loved Lindsey Graham, particularly his beautiful family. And may God rest the soul of Senator Lindsey Graham, a true American original.
Storms or us pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the inspiration of the life and legacy of Senator Lindsey Graham. We proclaim your generosity to this nation and world by giving us the gift of someone who sought to leave the world better than he found it. Inspired by his great life, teach us all to see you more clearly, to love you more dearly, and to follow you more nearly each day. Continue to bless and keep us. Make your face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. Lift the light of your countenance upon us and give us your shalom, your wholeness, your peace. We pray in the name of the Prince of Peace. Amen.
Well, thank you all so much for continuing here as we are wrapping up our coverage here at the Rotunda. I have Kirk Randazzo here and Bob Olendick joining us now. Thank you guys again so much for being here.
Sure.
As we're continuing to watch basically what we are just seeing right now on your screen. This is all of the senators, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is all of the senators as we are seeing. Earlier, we did have the family go in first, and then we had the members of in South Carolina representing South Carolina, representing the U.S. Senate, and then of course we had J.D. Vance representing there, and then going into the family. So we're at the point right now as everybody is giving their condolences. But I wanted to ask both of you kind of your reactions. Kirk, I'll start with you. What was your reaction to today's speeches and what we saw so far today?
In my opinion, I think probably the most powerful came from the Majority Leader Thune. And given his personal relationship with Lindsey Graham, I was very impressed that he kept his composure for as long as he did, but we did see at the end where he teared up as he was remembering his friend. And that, to me, I think speaks volumes about Lindsey Graham and the importance he placed on personal relationships. He and John Thune had an incredible relationship during their time in the Senate, and I think that came through in the Majority Leader's remarks.
Let me ask you a follow-up to that, and Bob, I'll get to you in just a second. When you kind of see something like that, does that really sometimes take or puts the human more in and takes it out of politics in a way because you saw that emotion?
Yeah, I think it's way too easy to just assume politicians are sort of these heartless creatures that just get into these political fights all the time. And we forget that they are regular people like us. And especially in an institution like the Senate, where relationships and discussions and building things with people become so important, to see the human side of that institution, we don't often get that glimpse. And I think Thune very much embodied that in his remarks today.
Bob, what was your takeaway?
Well, I think we have to remember this is such a unique event for Senator to lie in state like this. And it was kind of what we'd hope and what we'd kind of expected, that was very respectful, speaking to Graham's legacy, but also kind of recognizing that he worked across the aisle in just kind of a day to look at his accomplishments and his achievements and what his life meant. And there was some of this remembering that we are still have disagreements, but today is a day that we're unified and we come through this and say, you know, we can work together. A day of respect and hope, I think, is coming out of this.
It was also interesting. We were doing also research as well as we were kind of chatting during all of this. It seems like from our research, the last time for a senator to lie in the Rotunda was John McCain. So, Bob, really, what does that say about Lindsey's legacy, that was the last time, 2018, and now we're having it again here?
It showed how important he was and how much he was respected by his colleagues. He's had a great career, and since his death, I mean, a lot of the testimonials that have come out kind of go back to the whole kind of arc of his career from the House to the Senate, and just how important an actor he became both in national and international affairs.
This is also interesting too. This does not happen for every senator, and I think that's something that we also need to mention too, is that it's not when every senator passes. This is so rare, as we were kind of talking about this too. So how, as we are still watching this, as people are still paying their respects, how do you guys think that viewers should really understand the importance of having this at the Rotunda, having these 48 hours of remembrance as we continue to remember this, because this is so rare for a senator?
Yeah, as Bob said and as you just mentioned, this truly is unique. This does not happen often, and even for individuals that had served in the Senate for a long period of time, they often do not get honored this way. So this is truly reserved for individuals that had a monumental impact, possibly on the Senate itself, but more likely on the country as a whole. And I think that's the real kernel, the core of Lindsey Graham's legacy, was that over his entire period of time, he was one of the small group of people that were always in the conversation, rolling up their sleeves, getting stuff done. And I think this is a good tribute to remember the influence that he had.
And also continuing there, a lot of times when we heard with Vice President J.D. Vance really also bringing up one of the big viral moments, of course, with Kavanaugh and stuff like that, and kind of that back and forth. I mean, do you think the reactions that really skyrocketed him into spotlight, but here in the U.S., is that how the legacy is going to be defined? Because, Bob, you've been mentioning he's done so much for international politics as well in the future, but a lot of people remember that moment with Justice Kavanaugh.
Well, I think it's going to be the whole package, because if his impact had just been on domestic issues and not so much in foreign policy or vice versa, but he had just a range of impacts across different policy areas, and it just showed on the different committees. He was at the Budget Committee, his very influential work on the Judiciary Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee. I mean, it's a true kind of record of accomplishment that is being celebrated and should be.
It's also interesting to note as well, the Senate is going right back to work this afternoon. Can one of you talk a little bit about what is kind of happening? This is really all involving Russia, really involving kind of that Graham bill. Can we talk a little bit about what's happening later this afternoon?
Yeah, so one of the things that Lindsey Graham did that he was a champion for Ukraine. And you heard Bob mention earlier that right before his death, he was in Ukraine talking to President Zelensky about a new munitions package, some new arms to help them repel Russia. And the Senate is going back into session this afternoon to essentially pass a new sanctions bill against Russia that they are now naming after Lindsey Graham because of his staunch support for Ukraine. So this is part of the Senate's way to also memorialize their friend, to pass legislation that is in Lindsey's honor on the absolute day that they are remembering him in the Rotunda.
Okay, Bob, too, you were mentioning the international.
Yeah, well, as part of that, we have to remember that Lindsey Graham was not afraid to take on a challenge. And we've seen him be a staunch defender of Donald Trump, but he also had disagreements with the president. And one of them was on Russia, because he pushed, I think we see that he tried to push the president to put in stronger sanctions, to move in that direction. And this is a way that his colleagues in the Senate are kind of honoring by symbolically passing this legislation on the day that we're having this memorial ceremony. So again, another just example of how well he was respected in the Senate.
Let me ask you, how do you think that Lindsey Graham really shaped politics in South Carolina? We'll go to the nation and the world. How do you think he has shaped politics here in South Carolina?
I think one thing to remember is that as Lindsey was working in D.C. for all those decades, a key part of his efforts were constituent services back in South Carolina. So he worked very tirelessly to make sure that South Carolina would get resources that it needed. One example, given Graham's background in the military and the number of military bases across the state, Graham was a champion to make sure that those military bases remained vibrant, that they had the resources that they needed. And that's just one of numerous examples. I mean, I could tell a personal story about taking a class to DC and meeting with Lindsey Graham. This was in 2011, and he had to leave after 10 minutes because Benjamin Netanyahu was in the Capitol, and this was when he first was elected prime minister. But Graham took time out of his schedule from meeting with Netanyahu to meet with some students from the University of South Carolina. And so I think that is very much part of his legacy. He never forgot where he came from, and he always made sure that South Carolina would be front and center with everything he did.
Would you agree of his legacy with South Carolina, Bob?
Yes, definitely. And you just look at the arc of his career again, where he started in the state house and then was a representative. And then as he grew in stature in the Senate, he was able to make these connections and as different bills went through, some of them directly related to South Carolina, some not, but made sure that if there was a way to impact it that was to the benefit of the state, made sure that we protected South Carolina's interest. And it's one of the things that, we have this long history. When people from this state get elected to the Senate, they tend to serve for a long time. We look at Strawley Thurman's legacy, and Tim Scott seems to be going in that direction as well. So we have people in powerful positions that are able, even though we're not the biggest state, to protect our interest.
We also saw Tim Scott. We also saw some representatives from South Carolina. I'm sure we're going to be seeing them tomorrow over at the State House. In the days ahead, what should people really be watching for in the next pretty much 48 hours now?
Well, I think this is a time where everyone is just going to comment on who Lindsey Graham was and what he meant both to South Carolina, to the United States. After the next couple of days, then I think we have the scramble to replace Graham on the ticket. He was running for another term in November, and there's a packed field of people that would like to serve in that capacity, and we only have a couple of weeks until that special election comes in. So this is kind of the calm before the storm, so to speak. And then it's going to get pretty hectic over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we currently have 10 people who are going to be on the ballot. Today was the last day to file for that special Republican primary, which will be happening on August 11th. We have a full list of those candidates on our website, WLTX.com. Bob, we actually chatted a little bit before the filing opened with that. Some of those names we heard were going to be possibly running. Now we're seeing these numbers. Thoughts on a pretty packed run?
It's more than I ever expected. I mean, there's some days that were thrown out there early on that didn't wind up. I mean, we speculated earlier that maybe Nancy Mace would get back in, and some people wouldn't even mention Nikki Haley. But there are, 10 candidates in the field, 10, yeah. Which, tomorrow is a celebration of life and remembrance of Lindsey and the tributes. But when Thursday comes, it becomes a dogfight again, and we'll start to see more of the negative ads because again, such a unique situation, such a compressed time factor in terms of getting your message out and trying to differentiate yourself from the other people in the field. And we've got people, and there's nobody as we sit here today that says this is who's going to win or who's even going to be in the runoff. And we need to
there's no clear front runner right now
because they all have certain advantages and they all have some negatives as well. So
a lot of heavy hitters too as well. A lot of very big names in that group of 10 people who are going to be running there. Again, the primary is going to be on August 11th, and then a runoff if necessary. But I mean, again, with 10 candidates, that would
it's
then
likely.
Be, yeah,
it's likely.
I know, but it's again with 10 candidates, then that runoff would then happen on August 25th. With that, let me ask you too, as political science experts, when it comes to something like this and being so quick, I mean, we have to get it on the ballot and then of course get ready for November. How quickly can we, again, honor Lindsey Graham and honor this, get right back to work, basically on Thursday, and then get ready for August 11th. How quickly does this really all need to happen? And as candidates, how do they handle all of that?
They're just getting ready to burst out on Thursday because because some of them have name recognition. I mean, we recognize differences in terms of their popularity, but some of those candidates are just not known at all. And what are they going to run on? What are the issues going to be? This is going to be a campaign that almost has to be run completely on television with TV ads because you just don't have the time to go out knocking on doors and doing the phone banks. And I mean, there'll be some of that, but it's just, again, such a unique situation that it's going to be politics in South Carolina 101.
I think we need to recognize that sort of a typical campaign easily ramps up within a year out, possibly 18 months out, to give an individual time to get their staff together, to raise money, to start knocking on doors. And all of this now is happening within 2 weeks. Some candidates have some money that they can draw from previous campaigns. Others are basically starting from scratch. But as you heard Bob said, there's really no time to knock on doors, do a lot of community events, get your name out there. This is a sprint, and a 2-week window, that's just not much time at all.
Okay, so
When you compare it to the original primary, where people had geared up for a year to put their staff together, find out what the issues were. So you've got a year compared to a month. It's not
just
less
a
than
couple of
month.
weeks
Right.
at that point. Wow. Well, gentlemen, we appreciate you both taking the time to speak to us during this. It looks like the ceremony there over at the Rotunda has just wrapped up. So what we are going to do right here on WLTX Plus, we are going to take a quick little break as they are going to be bringing the casket over to the cathedral. And then at 2 o'clock, so in just a couple of hours, we will be back here streaming on WLTX Plus to bring you inside that church and bring you that part of that ceremony